Hello everyone, this is doncomet. Today's video is titled, Is Asahi Shimbun really prepared to accept a 2 trillion yen loss? The true war criminal behind the worsening Japan-China relations. The Chinese Consulate-General in Osaka has completely lost it. On November 8 at 23:40, the official X account of the Chinese Consulate-General in Osaka quoted an Asahi Shimbun Digital breaking news article and made a post. The headline of the quoted article read, Taiwan contingency, if certified as a survival-threatening situation, use of force is also possible. However, it later turned out that this headline had been quietly revised. The new headline now reads, Taiwan contingency could become a survival-threatening situation in the event of an armed attack. The impression it gives is quite different, isn't it? Since quite a bit of time has passed since this incident broke, let me first go over everything that has happened so far in chronological order. The Chinese Consulate-General in Osaka flew into a rage. Quoting the aforementioned article, they wrote, That filthy neck that dared to stick itself in without permission, I'll cut it off without a moment's hesitation. Are you ready for the consequences? It was an extremely aggressive tone, to say the least. This naturally caused a massive uproar on the Japanese side of the internet. Death threat against the Prime Minister. Expel him from the country. Persona non grata. They've finally shown their true colors. There were all sorts of extreme reactions. But given how extraordinarily inflammatory the original post from the Chinese Consulate-General was, I think the backlash was, in a way, only to be expected. By the evening of the next day, November 9th, the original post had been deleted. However, the account itself did not go silent. Around 1650 on November 9th, they posted again, still in a very aggressive tone. Those who keep making a fuss claiming that deterring China or a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency seem to be under the outrageous delusion that today's China is the same as the China of the past. In order to prevent them from making irreversible misjudgments, I'd like to point out just how far off their perception of reality is. I don't mind if this is called reverse oppression. They attached illustrations of Chinese warships to the post, and earlier posts had included actual footage of Chinese naval vessels as well. By the way, what exactly does bakatsu mean? In Zen training, it refers to the practice of loudly scolding a monk and striking him with a stick. You've probably seen scenes where a monk hits a meditating practitioner with a stick, right? They go katsu, like that. In other words, the consulate seemed to be saying, this is also part of your training, it's for your own good. They're not just angry for anger's sake, they're claiming to be angrily scolding you because we care about you. That's the nuance they were probably going for. Probably. Anyway, the Consulate-General had been repeatedly making these quite intense statements, but then, on November 9th at 23:36, they suddenly posted something with a noticeably softer tone. Please stop freely imagining things, exaggerating, and distorting the facts. Let me point out once again that the root of the problem lies with Japanese politicians who keep casually saying a Taiwan contingency is a Japan contingency. By your own logic, that would qualify as a splendid threat and incitement to murder against China. Whoa. Now they're playing the victim card? Huh. I'm sure plenty of people thought exactly that. The tone had completely flipped from before. Now it sounded almost like we're the ones who are scared here. Which could also be interpreted as a veiled threat. Then, on November 11th at exactly 8 a.m., so it was probably a scheduled post, they put up a long, rambling message. It was something about young compatriots singing together across mountains and seas and let's all get along, that kind of feel-good stuff. But after that very first post, reading this just made you go, what the heck is this? If that's how they really felt, then what on earth was that initial post about? I doubt very many people took this new message at face value. After that, the account reposted about 16 items related to posts made before the morning of November 11th. And the person behind the account is someone who reposts a lot in general, tons of stuff in Chinese, etc. But when I checked on November 20th, there had been no further activity. In other words, the last thing they posted or reposted was on November 11. You might think the storm had blown over. But far from it. Outside of the account itself, things exploded into an even bigger uproar. First, on November 10th, Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Kiera Minoru issued a strong protest to the Chinese government, stating that Japan is aware of multiple inappropriate remarks and strongly urges the Chinese side to take appropriate action. Meanwhile, the Chinese government was not staying silent either. On November 12th, the Taiwan Affairs Office of the State Council, the body in charge of Taiwan policy, issued the following statement. The malicious remarks about Taiwan openly made by Japanese leaders in the Diet violate the One China principle and constitute a gross interference in China's internal affairs. We express strong dissatisfaction and resolute opposition. On the other hand, X saw a different kind of excitement. On November 14th, the official account of the People's Liberation Army posted an image with the text, "If Japan intervenes militarily in the Taiwan Strait situation, it will inevitably be smashed to pieces before the iron wall of the People's Liberation Army and will have to pay an enormous price." A lot of people who saw this went, huh? Funkotsusishin, grind one's bones to powder. The expression itself originates in China and normally means to exert oneself to the utmost. Even if it means crushing one's bones and turning one's body to powder, a phrase used when someone is willing to sacrifice everything for a cause. For example, I will work with the resolve to grind my bones to powder. In Japan, it's generally understood in this positive, self-sacrificial sense. But the PLA almost certainly used it here in the literal sense of will crush your bones and turn your body into powder. At least that's how most Japanese people read it, which is why the post became something of a laughingstock. People were saying things like, don't they even know the proper meaning of a phrase from their own culture? Whether they genuinely meant it that way or whether it was some clever dark joke is hard to tell. The nuance is just too subtle. Their true intent remains unclear. Regardless, the Chinese side's overall stance remained extremely hardline. On November 14th, the Chinese Foreign Ministry declared that there is a serious risk to the safety of Chinese nationals, claiming that public safety in Japan is unstable and crimes targeting Chinese people are occurring frequently, and issued a travel advisory urging heightened vigilance and self-protection, effectively telling people not to travel to Japan. The very next day, November 15th, 6 Chinese airlines announced that they would offer free cancellations and refunds for flights to Japan. The offer applies to tickets for travel through December 31st, which gives the impression that they want to wrap this whole affair up by the end of the year. There are rumors that the Chinese government might be covering the cost of those refunds, but I haven't been able to confirm that. Then, on November 18th, the Nikkei, Japan economic newspaper, published an estimate of the economic impact of the travel advisory. Chinese tourist spending worth roughly 2 trillion yen. If prolonged, it will have a negative effect on the domestic economy. 2 trillion yen is no small amount. The story doesn't end there. On the same day, November 18th, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson posted an image containing the phrases "Japan must immediately retract its erroneous statements," and "We will never allow the resurgence of Japanese militarism." They posted it not only in Japanese but in English as well, clearly appealing both domestically and internationally. That said, this particular post ended up catching fire in a completely different way. Well, how should I put it? The post had this gradient background with the characters Ministry of Foreign Affairs on it, and people were saying it looked like some old school homepage from the early internet days. Then there were comments like, "This isn't wolf warrior diplomacy anymore, it's panicked diplomacy," And aren't they overreacting a bit? People also started reusing the exact same template for memes. Things like ramen, gyoza, and half a bowl of rice are non-negotiable. Image generation tools got involved, and it turned into a full-blown Onito comedy caption contest. Yeah. The Chinese Foreign Ministry basically became everyone's plaything. Among all of those, my personal favorite was one I saw on X. It went like this: the Emperor of the land where the sun rises sends this letter to the Emperor of the land where the sun sets. How are you faring? I'm sure some of you have heard this before. It's the famous letter Prince Shotoka sent to the Sui Emperor. It seems like a perfectly polite, harmless greeting, right? But apparently it infuriated the Sui Emperor. How dare you call Sui the land where the sun sets? The reply was supposedly along the lines of, "You're just our vassal, aren't you?" There's even a story that Ono Noamoko got so angry he threw the letter away on the way home, though I only know that from a gag manga. So I'm not 100% sure it's accurate. For the record, the letter arrived in 607. And the Sui dynasty fell exactly 11 years later. Just a little trivia. Anyway, that's the kind of atmosphere we had going on. But China itself has not softened its stance at all. On November 19th, the Chinese government officially notified Japan that imports of Japanese marine products were being suspended once again. This came barely 2 weeks after imports had just resumed on November 5. They cited the need for additional documentation proving safety. But given the timing, it's pretty clear this was a de facto retaliatory measure. The original import ban on marine products had been triggered by the release of treated water from Fukushima Daiichi. But before that release began, Japanese seafood exports to China accounted for roughly 20% of total exports, worth about 87.1 billion yen in 2022. So, to sum up everything we've looked at so far regarding this incident, Asahi Shimbun ran the headline "Taiwan contingency." If certified as a survival-threatening situation, use of force is also possible. The Chinese Consulate-General in Osaka quoted that headline, flew into a rage, and posted extremely inflammatory remarks like the only option is to cut off that filthy neck. In response, the Chinese government issued a travel advisory for Japan and suspended imports of Japanese marine products again. The Nikkei estimated the economic impact at around 2 trillion yen. Meanwhile, Asahi Shimbun quietly changed its original headline to "Could become a survival-threatening situation in the event of an armed attack." If you strip it down to just the key elements, it basically reads, "Use of force possible. Wardero Asahi headline Wardero travel ban plus seafood import suspension. Wardero 2 trillion yen impact." In short, this whole mess is Asahi Shimbun's fault, right? Does Asahi have nothing to say about this? There are quite a few people who'd love an explanation, but silence. Now, about the economic impact. Chinese tourists in Japan are basically locked into a closed loop or containment system. What that means is that even when they visit Japan, they don't use Japanese travel agencies, hotels, etc. Instead, they use Chinese airlines, Chinese taxis and buses, Chinese-owned hotels, and pay mostly with Chinese mobile payment apps or Chinese credit cards. The result? Almost none of that money actually reaches the Japanese economy. Sure, if individual tourists take the subway or eat at a local restaurant, a little trickles in, but the massive explosive buying boom from a few years ago is ancient history. So this supposed 2 trillion yen blow, most of it would be a loss for Chinese tourists and Chinese companies, not Japan. Any money that disappears is disappearing from their side, not ours. For example, just the other day on November 18th, a Chinese national running an illegal taxi, a white plate operation, was arrested on the spot in Kamakura. Back in September 2024, reports revealed that about 40% of businesses in Osaka's special economic zones were Chinese-owned or Chinese-operated. On November 17th, the city announced it would stop accepting new applications for such zones in order to tighten oversight. Stories of Chinese nationals doing pretty much whatever they want are gradually spreading and becoming widely recognized. And because of this incident, you're now hearing voices saying, thanks to fewer Chinese tourists, Japanese people can finally travel around their own country comfortably again. Lately it really was insane over tourism everywhere, packed trains, fully booked flights, huge buses squeezing into narrow roads and disgorging crowds of Chinese tourists. You heard those stories all over Japan. Now all of that has suddenly vanished, and people are saying, finally we Japanese can stretch our legs and enjoy our own country again. How are things in your area in the end? If this drags on, who is really going to suffer? And even if someone does suffer, isn't the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of Asahi Shimbun for publishing that bizarre headline in the first place? They're talking about a 2 trillion yen impact, yet Asahi Shimbun's total assets are reportedly 589.1 billion yen. How exactly do they plan to take responsibility? I'd love to see at least some kind of statement from them. It doesn't even have to be directed at Japan. If they want to release a statement in Chinese saying it's not our fault, that's fine too. Just say something, anything, and that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, please hit the like button, give it a high rating, and consider subscribing to the channel. If you're watching on your smartphone, tapping the bell icon will help the video reach more people, and I'd really appreciate it. That's all for today. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.